Welcome everybody to Pro Football Plus YouTube channel. Uh, I am your host for this evening, Robertson and you are definitely familiar if you are a subscriber of this channel with Ben Parker, co-host this evening. Um, thank you for having me on, Ben. Thank you for letting me host this. Position preview for the Washington Commanders, the quarterback position we are doing this evening. And we're going to be doing a lot of Commanders focused content over the summer and then even more so during the season. And we're very excited, for that. And thanks for having me on and hope you're doing well. I have not seen you in a few weeks. It's been like what has it been like it's been like 3 weeks since
It
we saw you.
has,
So
yeah.
how you doing?
I'm doing great. Hello, everybody. Again, thank you for hopping on as always. And thanks to Shane Ratliff for filling my spot for 2 of those weeks. I really
Yeah.
appreciate that. Um, we've been doing a little bit of rebranding of the channel, which those of you in the audience can see that if you saw the before and after. And then I've been doing a lot of film work on 2026 NFL prospects, and you can see some of those shows on the same channel. But I'm excited about the Commander stuff because we're doing it every other week all through the off season. And come the regular season, we're doing it every week. We're going to be doing a Commanders show every single week. So if you're a Commanders fan, or if you just want to tune in and get the lowdown on the Commanders, this is the spot to do it because we're not just covering what everybody else covers, and we're not just coming up with cute little trivia stuff, which is all fine. But we are actually doing some hardcore work. And so, as much time as we get during the summer, we're going to go through every position, not just from layer 1 or 2, but all the way through. How good are they? What's it costing? How do we feel about the position group? So the quarterbacks is the brightest spot, the one to start at, but it's probably the easiest, I think, right, Robertson?
I mean, yeah, this position for all intents and purposes is pretty cut and dry, if you're, even if you don't know the Commanders inside and out, this position's in good shape. And that's really the overall message, the overall theme tonight is that for the first time and God knows how long, I mean, Washington's set at the quarterback position for at least probably the next at least 2 seasons, even if things go haywire. It's a position they really don't have to worry about right now. That's not to say that they need to ignore it, but it is a position that they can just kind of sit back and just relax a little bit, which is good. It's good. So that's just my initial thought on it. I don't know if you want to inject anything in there before we get started, but I think that we are in an absolutely great place.
It is a great spot, and we're going to cover so much going all the way through, so I don't want to steal any thunder. The only thing I will say is after you're done with this video, we've also got a Commanders Stadium video up from 2 or 3 weeks ago. Go check that out. We've got other Commander stuff here, so go check it out on the same channel. But yeah, man, let's dive into the quarterbacks.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously when we got to start with, the guy here. I mean, it's QB1 Jayden Daniels, JD5. Um, one thing that I know that you're going to, really dive into is the value of Jayden Daniels. And, that's he doesn't count for more than 3% of the cap, which is
Yeah.
when guys like Brock Purdy are now getting $53 million a season. Jordan Love's getting 50, Trevor Lawrence is getting 50, Daniel Jones a couple years ago. It's old news at this point, but got 40, it's to have a guy on a rookie deal on a roster that, in the coming weeks you're going to find out is really not all that deep. It's very important to have
Yeah.
this guy on your roster.
Yeah, I totally agree. And value is a word that you'll hear a lot during the draft, right? It's value, 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 which usually just means, hey, I thought this guy should have been drafted higher than what he was, right? That's usually
Hmm.
what that means. But this is actual quantifiable value. Because your third note here, arguably a top 10 quarterback already. There were times last year I think you could have put him higher than that and times lower. But
For sure.
let's just say he's a top 8-ish quarterback if you want to kind of just be that, or top 10-ish quarterback. And you got it here, rookie contract, just over 3% of the cap. Man, that is a true measurable value, and not just a tiny one, a huge one. And listen, I'm well aware that guys with big contracts can win a lot of games and even win Super Bowls if they're the elite ones, right? I got that. The Josh Allens or the Lamar Jacksons or the Patrick Mahomeses or even the Jalen Hurtses. I'm well aware if you're in the audience that big money guys can win, but that's not always the norm, and they can lose too because they're such a burden, especially if they start to not be an elite quarterback, they're a mid-tier quarterback and making big time money. That's why you're seeing the 49ers jettison all those defensive players, is because even though they are manipulating the cap a good bit, they just couldn't manipulate it that much in order to get the Purdy contract that they were already planning on for quite a while, I'm sure. Man, if nothing else, you can breathe a lot easier knowing quarterback is set and quarterback is good, and we're not paying much there. But even beyond that, you now have that money that you can spread around the rest of the roster. And the rest of the roster isn't great, still got holes in it.
Hmm.
They haven't maxed out that money, but it's there. The money is there. And you talk about being able to build out the rest of the roster to get the most out of the Jayden Daniels couple of years until you do have to pay him too. I know there's ways to work around that big contract, but you'd rather not have to. And when you don't have to, you can really do a lot of different things financially to make the most of these couple of years. And Washington's in a great position. They're getting that specific value here. It is a huge value.
Yeah, I mean, and we're gonna get into this throughout, these videos, but it allows Adam Peters and company to pick their spots. Like they can go out and take a risk, just say on, potentially a Jalen Ramsey. They can go out and get a Marshawn Lattimore. They can go out and maybe get a Trey Hendrickson, right? This allows them to have that flexibility to where they can go out and get these guys and give them big contracts. Now they're not throwing money around. That's what I like about this group is they're not just because they have it, they're not just saying, "Oh, we have it, let's spend it." Some organizations, even this offseason, were like that, like, "Hey, we have money, let's spend it." That has not been these guys. So for Jayden to have this rookie contract and for this organization to take advantage of that so far, I mean, I hope they get a little bit more aggressive, but still keep that smart, that's, we're going to pick our spots. We're not going to just go throw money around. Because that's only going to help the team and Jayden in the end. But something that, you know, I think kind of gets swept under the rug because he was so great this past season is this is another season or off season under Kingsbury's system. I have this highlighted here. The benefit of having another full off season where it's like, okay, I know what to expect. I know the playbook, generally speaking. You know, I can now dive deeper into things. Kingsbury, David Blau, quarterbacks coach, they can dive deeper into concepts, into stuff, that is huge. It's because it's going to help in conversation we're going to have a little bit later about uh, adapting to stuff. So the deeper you can get into this system and the more comfortable you can get is only going to help.
Yeah, 1,000%. And listen, I don't mean to go down a pathway of cliches here, okay? But boy, you can go back to youth league football and how you're teaching kids, right, at any position. Let's take wide receiver. You can't teach a kid to run routes until he can learn to catch the ball. And once he's learned to catch the ball and catch the ball while he's running, now that kid can now learn to run routes. And once he's learned to run routes, then he can even at an advanced stage start to think about option routes, right? It all builds. And it's the same thing here with Jayden Daniels, who has soared past all of those levels of learning, right? But boy, he's here at the NFL. He's getting used to game speed, right? And he's got maybe
Hmm.
two reads on some of these plays. And he's been told, one read, two read, get rid of it, right? Well, now this year, if he's learning, and I don't doubt that he is, now it's three reads, and now he's got even more options on every play, and the defense has more to cover. So if everything's falling in place, and I don't doubt that it is, he's just got more options that he's got at his disposal, and more that the defense has to work against.
I mean, even if you go back and look to earlier last season, you could tell in those first couple games that he was not totally comfortable and that there wasn't
Right.
a lot he was being asked to do. Then around like week 4 or 5, that completely changed. They're like, yeah, he's doing fine. We're just gonna give him everything. And he, for all intents and purposes, he passed with flying colors, you know. Um, there are things I would like to see him do better. Um, I feel like one of the big problems from last year, and it's kind of one of those double-edged sword things, he would drift back in the pocket consistently. And it bothered me because, all the great quarterbacks, they can step up in the pocket, they can manipulate the pocket, they can do all this stuff. I did not see Jayden do that last year. And I get it, it's because he can roll out, it gives him opportunity to quickly scramble out, but it also puts him in more danger. And it sets up his offensive line for fail, or specifically the tackles up for failure because the speed guys can just run right past them, and they can't get set. So I would like to see better pocket presence overall from Jayden. I like to see him to get the ball out quicker. That wouldn't be a problem if he just, plants and throws. Um, and less hero ball. I mean, I love his ability to improvise, right? It's great. It usually has, at least based on last year's, it's like 9 out of 10 times it's gonna end up in a, positive result. But he's gonna get hit more often. He's putting himself in harm's way. I'd like to see him throw it away a couple times, right? Instead of scrambling for a yard or two or an even negative yardage, and which ends up as a sack. I'd like to see him throw the ball away. Um, because, yes, you're essentially giving up on a play, but you're not putting yourself or the team in harm's way. So I'd like to see that, progression uh going into this year.
Yeah, and that's where you start to test not just one attribute of a quarterback, but all of his attributes, right? Because
Yeah.
we already know about his scrambling and about his ability to not only extend the play to possibly throw downfield, but to just take the ball himself and break your back with it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he could be the hero. We got that. So they'll, because again, there are reasons why we don't want you to always be the hero, right? There were reasons why Michael Jordan, Phil wanted Michael Jordan to get rid of the ball sometimes. There are reasons for that. We won't necessarily get into that too deep tonight, but there are reasons we don't want you to always be the hero on every play. So we know that you can do the hero stuff. Now, we're going to test your arm strength. Can you consistently challenge defenses downfield from the pocket? And we're also going to test your ability to process, right? Can you, in the pocket, staying on your spot or even moving up, can you pick your way through the defense as they start to show you different things without having to run away? So we're going to test those, and maybe they don't test very high. Maybe he gets marginally better at those two things, and he still does a lot of hero ball, and it's still really good, right? But what we would really love to see is that development to, yes, I can stay right here and kill you. I don't have to go
Yeah.
anywhere. I'm just going to pick you apart with my arm.
Well, the great part about that is Adam Peters has said it, Dan Quinn has said it, Kingsbury said it. They have all been adamant that he is as good of a pocket passer as there is in the NFL right now.
Wow.
And if they say as much, then I'm not saying don't use his legs because it's what makes him great, but maybe tone it back a little bit. It's hard when you have the weapon like that, and it's like, well, we could really use it, but at the same time, the best ability is availability. And if you're constantly putting him in harm's way, running QB power, which I cannot understand with a guy of that stature why you're running QB power, but whatever. Um, less of those and more of get the ball out quick and get it into playmakers' hands. You have more playmakers now at your disposal. Start
Yep.
utilizing that. Um, and look, if I'm fine with running option plays. I'm fine using his legs, but as long as there's a clear out, right? Sliding, getting out of bounds. And he did a decent job of that last year. I'm not taking that away from him, but still, he was out a couple of games. He didn't miss any, but like, he had to go out of the Carolina game. He got, I wouldn't say benched, but essentially he got benched in the Dallas game because they didn't want him to get hurt. Like, it'd be nice to not have to worry about that. And it's always going to be a worry, but the play styles and the play calls would definitely assist with that. And along with the other things we talked about, pocket presence, getting the ball out quick, less hero ball, and so forth.
Yeah, and listen, I before I get into the health thing that you touched on, I'm going to stay on the hero ball here. And I hate to borrow again from the Michael Jordan analogy because I'm showing my age from my 1990s TV viewing, right? So apologies for that. But my old man card notwithstanding here, basically when Phil took over as coach, Michael was doing everything, and I mean everything, and he was not going to let anybody else do anything because he knew they weren't as good at it. But Phil was telling him, "Hey, man, the Pistons and everybody else, they're locking in on you, and they're just limiting what you can do, and you're not even including your teammates here. You're not going to win that way. You can't win championships." And what I would really love to, what they had to tell Michael was, hey, for 3 quarters, basically, you work within the team structure. All right. You just work within that. Fourth quarter, game time, it's yours. You can take over then if you want. And it's so hard because I'm the kind of guy, and I think John Calipari over in college basketball world was this kind of guy where if you've got great athletes, you want to just unleash them, right? You just want to cut them loose, let them flow, let them be artists, let them just literally feel their way through the game. They almost don't even have to think about it. But the NFL, unfortunately, is so structured and you have so many people working against you, you really can't let an athlete do that. Not the whole game, not week in and week out. You have to give them their moments where they are cut loose and can do whatever. But other than that, they need to work within the system. So it's not easy to tell Jayden, hey, don't run on this play, or if you run, step out of bounds. If you run, dive, because you really want him at full flow, full freedom, right? But
Mhm.
it's never pretty, but a good coordinator and a good quarterback can figure it out to where, hey, I've got enough structure here to keep myself out of harm's way and not hurt the team, but I've got enough freedom here to where when I need to make a play, I have the freedom to go out and just do it. And that's not ever real kind of clean. It's kind of messy a lot of times, but the good ones can put it together. And I do think that they are. I don't see that being a problem ultimately. I really don't.
Yeah, so it was a small moment, but a lot of fans will remember it, I suppose. During last preseason, uh it was very vanilla offense, right? Like as most
Yes.
offenses are in the preseason, right?
Yes.
Jayden just bombed one. He just like threw it as far as he could throw it to a guy and, scored. I don't know if he scored or not, but it was something pretty. And uh they asked, reporters asked Quinn at the end of the game, like, hey, what happened? He's like, well, he's like, you guys seen Top Gun? He said that was Maverick. He buzzed the tower. So he's got a little bit of that in him where, he feels comfortable enough that and trusted enough to make those decisions, even though they're discouraging him from doing so. But,
Right.
it
Right.
might get him into trouble one of these days. But, if it's
You
working, then you don't want to discourage him too much.
no, it's never easy. I will say, I would rather have a quarterback who's too aggressive and I have to reel him in a little bit than the opposite, the guy who's
Yes.
too timid and I got to
Hmm.
push him. Because personally, I'll hit a little bit of draft prospect here. Drew Aller over at Penn State, I think, is on the flip side of this, where he's, for whatever reason, I don't know if the coaches have gotten into his head too much or if he's gotten in his own head too much. He's just not particularly aggressive, even though he's incredibly talented. Jayden Daniels here on the other side is very aggressive, and I would rather have that ultimately because man, when you're going up against the best athletes in the world, I don't want timid. I can't have that.
I dare evoke the name, but it's the Kirk Cousins problem.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah,
he takes chances, but not enough and not when it counts.
right,
Um,
right.
so expectations are now, I would argue, higher than any second year quarterback, like other than maybe Patrick Mahomes. But even then, that wasn't
Yeah,
really, I mean, going into second year as a starter, everything was, expected to be championships from there on out. But outside of him, I don't know that there's been a quarterback that is going to have higher expectations than Jayden Daniels. So I put this in here because we've been bit before,
yeah,
and but not only that, it's like he's so cool and calm under pressure, but I don't know he's ever been under this amount of pressure ever before in his life, and at least in his professional career. Even going back to LSU, like, yeah, he had pressure, but not nearly the kind that he has now. So I'm just curious how he's going to handle that. And I'm also curious, like, if he starts struggling, what's going to happen? He didn't really, I mean, there were times where he wasn't playing great, but he didn't really struggle mightily at times last year. And even the great ones have gone through just slumps. Um, how does he handle that? How does he handle this adversity that's eventually going to come his way? I'm not saying he can't handle it. I'm just curious what the results are going to be. I can be very optimistic and also reasonably skeptical at the same time. And I feel like I have a healthy amount of both. Um, but that's why I feel like they're questions worth asking.
It really is, man. And again, it would be real easy to just go down a whole rabbit hole of cliches here. I'm not going to do that. Okay. I'm just not going to do it. You and I are good about not doing that. All right.
Yeah.
So you're going to get some raw thoughts here, but I think it's important. Um, that mainly depends on Jayden himself, mentally, emotionally. If he just doesn't have the makeup to handle expectations, ultimately nobody's going to truly be able to get him there, right? It feels like, having gone through everything he went through at Arizona State, LSU, and then the first year here at Washington, it feels like he's got the makeup to handle it. So maybe pretty much check that box based on what we've seen so far, he himself. The second big part of that, though, assuming he's got somewhat the makeup to handle it, really is the two coaches. That's his head coach and his coordinator. I thought Bill Belichick was one of the best ever at getting teams and players to focus, because expectations were always big in New England, especially once Tom Brady started showing things. And Belichick, for all of his unlikability at times and his kind of grunting toward the media, um, he really was a master among many things, but he was a master at, hey, just this week, just focus. And it wasn't like he was throwing a bunch of cliches at his guys either. It literally was, as Belichick, I have sat in a room by myself and I have thought about what I can do in the game and on the practice field to help this player this week. And that's so huge because, I mean, it's one thing to be, master psychologist and kind of try to rah-rah the guys. That's fine. But boy, once you've been hit for the third time in the first quarter, or once you start off one completion out of seven passes in the second quarter, and your team's 3-5, the rah rah stuff means, doggy do. I mean, nothing. It's worthless. So you get back to the coaches, right? Can they actually figure out how to help him? If he is struggling, or if
Mhm.
the expectations are soaring, how do we stay focused? And so much of that is, well, we're going to make sure you have open receivers on all these plays. We're going to make sure the running game is a little bit better this week. We're going to make sure the offensive line is doing things a little bit different this week. It's actually having answers. And some coaches' staff is better at that than others, right? But I do feel like
Mhm.
those are the two things.
Yeah.
Jayden's himself, how does he tick? And then what are the coaches doing to actually help?
So real quick before we move on, and we're going to talk about this probably a few other times, but do you anticipate with the schedule now that we know that and all the primetime slots, do you expect a step back?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can't wait to see what you're going to say on this in a second. Ultimately, I'm going to say not a step back. Um, I might expect some kind of leveling off in year two, where maybe he doesn't surprise us again with what he can do, because we know what he can do. But when you look back on the season from a productivity standpoint, and it's like, how does this season, without going through all the roller coasters, right?
Mhm.
How does this season look to last season? I expect it will look largely the same. Emotionally, it may not be quite the sky high that year one was. I don't think it'll be that. But maybe he does level off a little bit. I just don't expect a drop off, right? Now, one of the trade offs of coming back for year two is that every coordinator in the league has been thinking about you all off season.
Mm,
while
yeah.
while Jayden's on vacation, the Cowboys defensive coordinator has been sitting in a room thinking about you. And when Jayden shows up to training camp, the Eagles defensive coordinator has already spent many months thinking about you. And these guys will figure out ways to force you to do something different. But, you know, I think he's got the skill set to do things differently. And I think he's got a coach who's creative enough in Kingsbury to do things a little differently too once they start seeing the adjustments, right? And boy, it feels good when you can see they've upgraded the talent on the offensive side of the football. We're not coming back with the same group we had last year. You've already mentioned that. We got a different, better group. So ultimately, I figure maybe a leveling off. I just don't expect an actual true slump here this year.
I will evoke a phrase that I'm pretty sure I've used before in our previous shows. It's called Ashburn syndrome,
Yeah,
where, the team's practicing in Ashburn and everything looks great and everything just it doesn't seem like, as a fan you get, you're looking through rose colored glasses and everything just seems to be so perfect and great and nothing can stop you. And then reality hits, you know. Like to me, maybe I got a little bit of Ashburn syndrome, but I think that he can take one or even two steps forward, and that doesn't necessarily mean team success. It mainly just means him getting better as a better quarterback because, regardless of how he plays, I mean, we've seen elite quarterbacks like Lamar, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, and they just can't get it done. And it's not necessarily all their fault. It's just they don't have the team around them, but
right.
they're still playing at MVP caliber levels. I think the same with Jayden for this year. I think he could take a few steps forward, and the team just, for whatever reason, probably mainly due to lack of talent and the defense, but they just don't take a step forward with him. Um, I think it's more likely that your scenario where he just kind of levels off a bit at best. Um, but I expect there to be peaks and valleys, but I think the peaks are going to be potentially higher than they were last season.
Yeah, I could see either one. I I barring an injury, I don't see him taking any kind of significant step back from last year. That's
Right.
what I'm struggling to see. Now, if he gets a little banged up, then yeah, you're going to see the kind of the slump in there. Um,
Yeah.
it, it it all feels really good to me, and I know people pointing to Houston last year and what felt like a step back there. In a way, it was, but when you look back on the year and you actually compare year two to year one, it was not a
Yeah.
massive step back. Stroud didn't play with the same maybe energy or sharpness that it felt in year one, but part of that was kind of the surprise factor, right? So I just don't even think we're going to have that feeling coming off of Jayden Daniels in year two. The one thing I will say, year two can often just be the difference in, hey, he's a really good quarterback versus he's one of the great ones. If he does this
Hmm.
again in year two, kind of takes the next step or two, you may be like, wow, we've got one of the really truly special people. And if he levels off, it may be more of, hey, we've just got a really good quarterback here. This is what we've got. We've got a good franchise guy, and that's fine too. That's where he is. Obviously, we'd love to have the elite status, but maybe he doesn't step into elite status. Maybe he's just really good for several years, which is more than Washington has had for a while. In terms of
Yeah.
being consistent there. So, uh, you know, I'm sure as an athlete, because I've only ever felt this in backyard ball. I've never felt it in organized sports. But sometimes you just feel it's not right. It's like, man, I did it yesterday. Why can't I
Hmm.
do it today the same way? I think getting him past that feeling and just focusing on work, focusing on being the best we can be this week, focusing on the team winning versus the team losing, and not trying to be the superstar, not trying to be the big man in town, not trying to be the guy who's got to carry everybody, not trying to be as special or as amazing where everybody on ESPN is talking about me this week. Those don't need to be the important things. It needs to be over here, week in, week out. Practice, get better, win the game. That really needs to be the focus. And when that's the focus, it does tend to take some of that emotion out of it, and that can certainly help be more consistent.
I will. My final point on this is, regardless of what happens this year, I'm still not 100%. Like I need to see a guy for 2 or 3 seasons to really know what they are. Like for me, like for a guy like Jordan Love, like this season, after this season, we're gonna know what he is. You know,
Right,
for me, not this season, it'd probably be next season, as long as he's fully healthy and plays probably at least 14 to 15 games each of the next 2 seasons. At the end of this 2027 or 2026, I guess it would be, then we're gonna know who Jayden is. Um, that's just my opinion. I've not wavered on that, since all our quarterback talk. It takes a few years to really understand who quarterbacks are, and I don't like the knee-jerk reactions with things, because based on, if you go based on the first seasons of people starting, then you can draw a lot of conclusions
right.
prematurely. So, um, any other thoughts on Jayden?
We could talk about him all night. And listen, we've spent most of this video as we planned talking about him because
Hmm.
he's the one who needed the discussion. Um, can't say it enough, though, man. No matter what this year turns out to be, the future is really bright here from so many different angles. Man,
Hmm.
even if Jayden wasn't here, the future is already brighter than it was 3 or 4 years ago. But boy, he's like the crown jewel on the crown, and
Yeah.
just keep him healthy, help him stay focused, and if he gets better, great. If not, he's still pretty good. So I mean, it's exciting.
All right, moving on to the backup. Usually everyone's favorite.
Yes.
uh Marcus Mariota. Really a last year was probably a perfect season that you could have for a backup, right? I mean, he got called upon a couple times, really in relief appearances. He played about a game and a half total. Um, and was, wasn't great, but he was really solid. He was really good. The offense did not skip a beat with Jayden out when he stepped in. I mean, that's what you want from your backup quarterback, and he fit the bill perfectly. He's a little pricey. I want, for backups, I guess he could be a little bit pricey, but I think it's money well spent. Jayden has raved about him. He raved about him all last year in the offseason, during the season. I'm sure it'll continue the same, going into this offseason and throughout this season. Um, he's just who he is at this point in his career. He is a top tier backup. He might not be the best, but he's in that echelon of top backups. You don't in this system, you don't have to change the system. You don't have to change the play calling when he comes in, which I think is huge. Um, and I think at this point, based on what he did last year, he has the trust of the coaching staff and a lot of his teammates.
Yeah, I agree, and I know people who will say, "Well, why does that money need to be invested in a backup quarterback?" Matter of fact, Bill Polian, years ago, the general manager of the Colts, back when he had Peyton Manning, he didn't believe in putting money into a backup quarterback because his theory was if Peyton's out, doomed anyway, right? So,
You're
you
telling
could
me Jim
take,
Sorgi wasn't the guy? Come on now.
yeah, no, the list of Colts replacements, when Peyton was injured wasn't it was not very stellar to say the least, but Bill Polian, brilliant as he was, just didn't believe in that. And I emotionally, I always felt different, man. I listen. Polian's one of the best to ever do it, right? But emotionally, I felt like what more important position could we invest in than quarterback? And I know that the one at the top, in this case, Jayden Daniels, is going to be light years better than anybody else we plug in. But man, for less than the price of most starters in the NFL, starting at other positions, right? Your average solid starters for here $8 million. We can at least give ourselves a chance if Jayden Daniels is out for 4 weeks, and that could be the difference between being in the playoffs or not. And I get it. If Jayden Daniels is out for the year, probably there go all our hopes, right? But dang it, if he's out for 4 weeks, you pick any 4 week stretch you want, and we need our backup to play. That could be the difference between 10-7 and in the playoffs versus 8-9 out. So I've always wanted to make sure we had a chance every week to win, and knowing that your backup quarterback gives you that chance. And listen, nobody's going to confuse Marcus Mariota with one of the better pass throwers in the league. All right, but the time you put together his ability to work with his teammates, his ability to throw the football to some extent, and his ability to run, when you put all that together, it's a good backup. It gives you a chance in these games, and that is so huge. And if for some reason Jayden were to get injured late in the year, and you're like, man, if we could just win week 1 in the playoffs and Jayden's back, that could be the huge difference, right? So I
Hmm.
I always really really felt like I wanted a good backup. Man, I just really wanted one, and I hoped my starter was amazing. But I needed a good backup too. Is where I was at. So, man, I love that y'all are paying some money here for Marcus Mariota to be here.
I mean, pretty much all of the attributes and stuff that you mentioned. I mean, he fits the bill with that. Teammates love him. Even when there was that situation in Atlanta. I mean, teammates, have
Yeah.
not really said a cross word about him. And the fact that Jayden has gravitated toward him, I think, is a big deal. I think if that relationship didn't exist to the extent it does, I don't know that we re-sign him, you know? Not to say that he wasn't worth it, but at the same time, we're there's a lot of holes on this roster and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that more so into him actually fitting. Um, because I mean, you look at Marcus Mariota when he first came into the league, and you look what Jayden, you know, when Jayden came out, they were virtually the same. Mariota was a Heisman winner, second overall pick, had a decent first year. Jayden, Heisman winner, second overall pick, a lot of attention, a lot of fame and so forth. I mean, what better mentor to have than a guy that's been there, done that through the exact same situation? And was touted as a savior for their next franchise. Um, I agree with you that he can start and steady the ship. I don't know that you can say that for all backups, which again you pay a premium for, and I'm fine with that. I'd be fine with him starting a playoff game if need be. I wouldn't. You don't feel great about it, obviously,
Right.
but you feel like,
Right.
hey, this guy at least gives us a chance to be competitive in that game. Obviously matchups depending and all that. A lot goes into that, even with Jayden Daniels. But if Mario had to, I wouldn't feel terrible about the chances. I'd feel like, okay, we have, there's a chance that things could go well. So I'm I'm happy he's here. I don't know what the future is at this position. It's probably not him. He's not that old, believe it or not, but I don't know that he wants to stay a backup for the rest of his career, even though that's probably what he's destined to be. But there's going to be a point where we don't pay him anymore, because we're going to acquire some more assets. We're going to, invest in some other positions to where Jayden ideally is just going to be taking off and not necessarily need him anymore. So this may or may not be the last year of him. I'm more curious about what the future holds for the backup position.
Yeah, my favorite way to do it at almost any position is to pair a veteran with a rookie or a young guy, a veteran with a young guy, and best man wins, and then they just help each other from there. Um,
Hmm.
it does get difficult though at a certain point, because if you're the Commanders, let's say next year, and you're trying to win, you're close, you're trying to squeeze every juice out of that apple, right? Paying 8 to a backup as opposed to maybe drafting a guy, and just taking that $8 million and reinvesting that into another starter who then, in theory, if Jayden is healthy, and that's the risk, right? That's the gamble. If
Hmm.
Jayden is healthy, we don't need the backup. We use that starter to then launch us even farther into the playoffs and maybe even all the way to the Super Bowl, which I weren't far from last year. I get the thinking, especially starting heading into next year, but I just didn't think this year that there was any real reason to not be signing Mariota. So agreed.
I think when Justin Fields inevitably does not work out, then you go after him and pay him less than what you are paying Marcus Mariota. But that's just my
Right.
contention on that one.
That's a great point. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on Mariota?
No, listen, I'm glad he's on the team, and he probably will get some playing time at some point this year, whether it's blowouts or hopefully not an injury, but more than likely he'll be on the field at some point.
All right, did want to mention really quick the Simon and Friends podcast. For any movie or Mission Impossible fans out there, the Simon and Friends podcast has a live reaction to Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning coming out this Thursday. Immediate reaction to the movie, discussing the top moments, themes, and character beats from the latest installment of the Mission Impossible series. Check out the Simon and Friends podcast every Thursday, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get them. And Ben, you want to tell us about the Box Score YouTube channel?
Yeah, the box score has really started changing what they're doing, and listen, you talk about a variety of stuff. Most of it is football, but not all of it. You've got tricky takes with baseball all summer. Come football season, they'll be back into football as well. You've got two peas in a pod with Peyton and Parker, who are brothers, and they do everything from NFL to NBA and a little bit of golfing in there mixed in, a little bit of highlights, news and notes there. That's a fun show. Peyton did the trivia night couple of weeks ago with me, you, and about four of the members of the Box Score Network. And slowly but surely, he's putting out those segments one a week, basically. So that's a lot of fun to try to watch us go against each other and try to remember what happened in football over the last 8 years, basically. And then you got the soccer show, McCall's CONCACAF. Lots of stuff on there as well from all over the soccer world. And there are more shows. All right, so go check it out. That's the Box Score Network on the Box Score YouTube channel.
I also want to shout out the newest edition in the flat, the college football centric podcast. So, but they are posting episodes on the YouTube channel as well. Um, as it says here, Box Score Trivia Night, that was the latest episode that was uploaded, and I think there's another one coming either tomorrow or Thursday, but be on the lookout for that. Make sure you go subscribe, and while you're at it, subscribe to this channel as well, Pro Football Plus, and turn on notifications. You'll get notifications anytime any of these shows get uploaded, whether it's Commanders focus stuff, whether it's prospect stuff that Ben's doing with some of the other guys. Just make sure you got subscribed and notifications turned on as well. Now, important stuff here. Josh Johnson. Okay. All right. Look,
Yes.
he was brought in a couple weeks ago. A bit, I wouldn't say a surprise, but it makes sense. Um, he's going to be the emergency quarterback on game day. He's not going to dress. He's not going to take up a roster spot. A very interesting quarterback. He did play here once before, about 8 years ago in 2018, after Alex Smith went down, after we went through, guys like Colt McCoy, after we went through guys like Mark Sanchez and all these guys, right? Josh Johnson kind of came in, kept us alive for about 10 minutes. And, he just got, he just didn't have it, right? So it's like, well, why do you bring on a guy like that? Well, he has a lot of experience. He's been in the NFL for 10 seasons. He had a brief stint, I believe, in the XFL, UFL, one of the other leagues. He had stints there. Um, Coaches have said, uh, in all that he's played on 14 NFL rosters, coaches have said the reason he keeps getting jobs is because he's very intelligent. He knows so many different systems, which only means that he can pick up Kingsbury's system rather easily. Um, so it's a great addition to the quarterback room because of those reasons. He has a lot of experience. He's well traveled. He has a lot of experience with a lot of systems, a lot of the same concepts. And again, in an emergency situation where you have to use them, you don't have to change really your playbook that much, which is huge. You think back to other teams where they have to go their second or third guy, and everyone's scrambling because they don't know what to do, and it's just run straight up the middle. You don't have to do that with this guy. Now you don't want him on the field. Let's be clear about that. You don't really want this guy on the field, but if you have to have him, there's really, I want to say there's not better options, but for what he is and for an emergency situation, you can't really ask for much more.
Yeah, and listen, the intelligence helps so much when you're just trying to pick up a guy who can get you through, the quarterback numbers. But the talent is not there, so you're right. You really hope he doesn't ever see the field. If he does, because even in a blowout, he's probably not going to be the guy on the field, right? So
No.
you're hoping he never sees the field. Unfortunately, I think it was the 49ers who had to use him against the Eagles in that
Hmm.
ill-fated NFC title game 2 or 3 years ago.
Hmm.
And had it not been for those injuries, man, they might have won that game instead of losing it to the Eagles. But yeah, listen, more than happy to have him on the team, and he is brilliant with those systems. But you don't want to see him on the football field because that probably means you've had two injuries more than likely at the quarterback spot.
Yeah, and that's just not good. You don't want, I mean, but at the same time, you need to be prepared for it because, I mean, Adam Peters, he was on that 49ers, team when, he was in the front
Yeah,
office during that
it
time.
was.
So
Yes.
having a guy like this as your emergency quarterback is important. You hope you never see. Last year was Jeff Driscoll, I believe. You don't want Jeff Driscoll on the field either, right? So
Right.
you can't really complain too much. And again, same type of quarterback of Jayden and Marcus Mariota. You don't have to change much. So does it really matter? If the guy's marginally better than Josh Johnson, but he doesn't fit the system? No, not really. So I like that we added him. I think he's going to be, if nothing else, a good veteran presence in the room. And again, like we've iterated, you hope he doesn't play.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, wrapping it up. Practice squad guy, more likely than not, Sam Hartman. So I want you to, because we have not talked at all about Sam Hartman, like at all in the, I guess, year he's been here. What was your evaluation of him at Wake Forest and Notre Dame?
Yeah, and listen, the Wake Forest tape is going to be a whole lot better. Okay, in all
Right.
honesty, um, excuse me, that 1 year at Wake Forest, his last year at Wake Forest, which I guess would be 2.5 years ago now, was tremendous. Wow, that he lighted up. I mean, it was pretty, really beautiful offensive performances. He was hooking up with his receivers, man, and throwing deep downfield too. Ultimately, though, the arm just doesn't seem to be strong enough to where you really want him on the football field, and that can be seen in two ways. It's zip on the ball in say the 15 to 25 yard areas, just not going to be as strong as you really need it to be at the NFL level. It's not that he should not ever be on a football field at the NFL level. It's just you really don't want him there. It's not, it's probably not going to be great. And then the depth of throws, he really is not going to be able to challenge defenses 40 or 50 yards downfield, right? He's just not going to be able to do that. So he is mobile. He can run around. That does help a lot. Smart guy, seems to be a likable guy. When he went to Notre Dame, they were glad to have him. Matter of fact, they wanted him. They recruited him to transfer from Wake Forest to Notre Dame, right? When he entered the transfer portal, but the Notre Dame tape is pretty rough, and the folks at Notre Dame, the fans there, they were not too excited when it actually once he got on the field and started playing. It just never did work out because the level of competition stepped up. He had better talent. I don't know if he had better wide receivers. He had better talent overall at Notre Dame than he did at Wake Forest. The wide receivers were probably a little bit about the same, but the level of competition stepped up big time because you're going up against largely not just ACC schools, but Big Ten type schools too, is some of what they're running up against. And that was instead of going up against almost all ACC schools at Wake Forest, plus, a couple of lower level schools. So the competition stepped up and, you know, it wasn't great. But I'm glad to see him here getting a chance.
Yeah, I mean, him and Jayden are like inseparable, like they're always talking and goofing around with each other. Um, Teammates love him. It was funny. So, a few days ago, one of his teammates, like he prank called him or whatever. He was like one of the first guys that he called to prank call him. And he was like a defensive guy. So like, um, so that was kind of cool to see that he's been at like Washington Capital games, chugging beers. He's been at Wizards games. Like he's just, around. He just seems like a cool, fun dude, right? And he's got the whole like look thing going on, and all that. So he's just kind of like a fun guy to have like on the team, like for fans and for players and stuff like that. He has enough talent in my estimation. He has enough talent to stick around as a practice squad guy, but you definitely don't really want to see him on the field. I don't think he has that type of talent even as a backup. Um, to me, he's like a Colt McCoy light, where he's not as dynamic as Colt was. He wasn't as mobile as Colt was, but he still has that uh improvisation, ability. He can, make things happen. He can scramble, he can move. But he's not quite at the same level, same pedigree that Colt McCoy was, even on the NFL level.
I
Um, Go ahead.
Yeah, and I apologize for interrupting. And I agree. Coming off the Wake Forest year, heading into Notre Dame, I was very excited for him. I thought, hey, this guy's got a chance not to be an NFL stud, but this guy's got a chance to earn himself an NFL job in the future because the Wake Forest tape is really pretty. I mean, there's lots of good, big, deep throws. I mean, he was slinging it downfield. And obviously, because I was wrong there, obviously I was wrong. But I wasn't alone in that thought because obviously Marcus Freeman, head coach of Notre Dame, was thinking the same thing. That's why you bring him over. You don't bring him over if you think he's going to look as bad as he looked that one year at Notre Dame. So obviously he was thinking the same thing. But when it came time to do more than what the Wake Forest offense required against better competition, that's when it really started to show up that, hey, he just doesn't have it. He just doesn't have that NFL level push. And again, I'm not going to say he could never develop into a guy who could get some playing time on the field at some point, but you really hope that's not ever the case.
Yeah. I think it's worth trying to develop him into something,
Right. Right.
but and we're going to get into this here in a minute. I'm not going to hesitate to draft a guy to replace him.
Right.
Like if he wants to, transition from, if he can try to hang on for a couple years in the NFL and try to get on a practice squad, which he probably will get on a couple of different practice squads, but he's going to end up being a coach, on Kingsbury's, when he becomes a head coach, he's going to be like a low level, guy on his coaching staff. That's what I see, in his future, or he might go back to college, who knows. But unfortunately, and it's not a bad gig, you got your time, you got your experience in there, and it's going to help you with your coaching. I just don't see him being a long-term backup. He'd have to essentially do what Taylor Heineke did and just get a chance and make the most of it, and then that'll keep him around for a couple years longer. But outside of
Right.
that, I mean, that's a once in a million, type of situation and opportunity. Um, I just don't see that happening with him. Um, Again, it's worth the time and to try now, but it's probably not going to happen. And I would prefer, we can go ahead and get into that conversation. I think next year is the time you draft a quarterback, um, fourth, fifth, sixth round, um, because you need to have a guy that has a pedigree, that has talent, that you can begin to rely on, begin to develop behind Jayden. Because like we mentioned, you don't want to uh, keep paying a guy like Marcus Mariota. You want to see if you can get by with, a guy on a rookie deal. And there's nothing wrong with, and we've talked about this before in a lot of other podcasts and videos that we've done where we can draft a quarterback pretty much every year, if not every other year. That's fine. It's a low risk reward. How many of these other guys what's that linebacker in the seventh round going to do for you? You know,
Yeah.
probably not much. What is a quarterback going to do anything more? Maybe not, but it's an incredibly important position that if you can keep churning out guys, I mean, at best they're trade bait or they're just steady backups for you.
Yeah. I see, and I agree. I I've been one of the leaders, and I don't know that I'm probably the minority. You probably are too on this, but I've been one of the loudest people about, hey, there's nothing wrong with drafting a quarterback. Maybe not every year, but like you said, every other year, nothing wrong
Mm,
with that. There is no more valuable commodity, even if all he does is turn into a Matt Flynn, right, where he blows up one week, and you trade him during the off season.
yeah,
What have you lost, man? You've lost
yeah,
nothing. You've lost that seventh round linebacker. Okay, all right, sure. Tell me about it. The guy who didn't make the squad. Um, man, and at best, listen, we're not looking for Jayden Daniels replacements, but if you do have an average quarterback, the guy you drafted a year or two later may be the guy that steps in and takes the place. Even if he's not any better, he may be the guy that saves you a bunch of money. I just to me, especially if you're good at developing quarterbacks, which I don't know how many people are that good in the NFL at it, but if you do feel like you're good at it, why not draft these guys? Keep somebody else from getting them. If they've got size, decent arm, got a little mobility, what do you have to lose other than improve your backup play? I mean, I would do it every other year, and I would talk to Jayden. I'd be like, hey, we are not drafting your replacement here. We're not even thinking about that, but we are drafting your backup. We're hoping to improve the backup room here. So,
yeah.
and listen, we're at the same way with which I guess they could have got more, but when the Patriots drafted I lost his name now, but the guy that drafted,
Garoppolo.
yeah, behind Brady, I think they did that with the intention of potentially replacing Brady, but Brady played longer than anybody thought. Brady didn't like Garoppolo sitting back there, so they shipped him out. I think they could have got more for him had they not specifically decided to, get him over with Shanahan, right? But
Hmm.
still, in most cases, what do you have to lose, right?
Hmm.
Not much.
Yeah, I think they did the same with Brissett and Mallet as well, but they just
Yes.
didn't. Mallet didn't really work out at all, and then
Mm-hmm.
Brissett, I mean, he's still a decent backup, but
Right.
yeah. Um, if I had to give the whole room a grade, I'd probably be an A. Maybe A minus, but it'd definitely be an A.
Yeah, especially when you consider, I'd probably be in the B plus category. But when I consider the age here of Jayden Daniels and the fact
Hmm.
that he might actually get better, and when you're starting to calculate in the hope for the franchise and how much money you're paying him right now, I
Hmm.
mean, just state of the room plus the backup there, I love it. I can easily get up to B plus A minus category here, just all things considered. And man, you know, right now everything just seems to keep getting better and better for Washington. We'll see how far this fairy tale can go, but it looks really good right now.
All right. Any other thoughts on these quarterbacks?
No, not on these quarterbacks. Just one other shout out also on this channel. Robertson and Shane, excuse me, my throat's getting dry. Robertson and Shane covered the Washington Commanders schedule a week or two ago. So go check that out on this same channel, Pro Football Plus, and get the in-depth thoughts on the schedule and what they're looking at throughout the season.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you're subscribed, turn on notifications, and we will see you in 2 weeks with our next position that we're going to cover.